Hello, Americans. I'm Paul Harvey, and this is the testing time. We are being tested, you know, you and I, individually and collectively. The test isn't going to be all fun or all easy. Such a little while ago, we sat around in our councils of men, chewing our fingernails up past the elbow, worrying about the hideous force which man had loosed on the world when he unharnessed the atom. Now, looking back, we can see that the nuclear weapon was a disguised blessing. Hot or cold, wars never end. Cain clobbered Abel with about a 4-pound club, and men have been fighting ever since. The only difference being that with each succeeding generation, the foot-pounds of destructive energy which one man can deliver increased through the development of the crossbow, the catapult, gunpowder, and the automatic weapons, the cannon, the airplane, the bomb, the blockbuster. For thousands of years, the line on the chart measuring the foot-pounds of destructive energy which one man can wield goes up in a slow, steady incline until August 1945. Suddenly, the line on the graph shoots for the stratosphere, for then there'd been thrust into the hands of man a weapon 400 million times more lethal than anything ever before. This has changed the complexion of war. Wars never end.
Legend has it that the meeting between Truman and Oppenheimer was pretty brief. After the handshaking greeting, they sat down. Robert said something like, "I'm afraid I have blood on my hands." Harry replied by pulling out a handkerchief, offering to wipe off the blood.
That's who we're dealing with. Harry couldn't relate to Robert. If he did, I don't know how he'd get any sleep or not shove a loaded gun down his throat. When people talk about Truman, he's either a badass or a monster. But he was just a man who convinced himself that he did the right thing.
How did you sleep? Well, I never had any trouble sleeping. When it came time for me to sleep, I'd go to sleep and sleep. And at this day, I can sit down in a right comfortable chair and take a nap and relax. I guess maybe the conscience part of me is not as strong as it ought to be because I never look backwards. I'm always looking to the front. There's always something ahead of me that ought to be done, and things that are past can't be remedied except by another effort and another decision. And the words that I get the least kick out of are, "I told you so, and it might have been." I think the saddest of all sad words of tongue of pen are these, "it might have been."
Put yourself in his shoes. You're thrown into power and just killed a minimum of over 100,000, not soldiers, but innocent people, women, children, babies. You burned them alive. You have two options: justify it or regret it. Justifying it is way easier and really the only way to live with yourself. Regret isn't an option.
Afterthoughts and things after the fact have no effect on making a decision when it's time to make it at the time. You have to work on what you know at that time. And that's what I did, and I'm not sorry for it.
You have to convince not just yourself, but the world, and Truman did, which is why he has such a well-respected legacy. Think about what people still say about him to this day. He did the right thing. He saved millions of lives. He ended the war. Truman won. This video can't erase his victory.
I don't even really know why I'm making this anymore. I started making this over 4 years ago, and the US presidents was my fixation at the time, and I pledged to make a video on every single one. I made an edit of human history leading up to the nuke, and I've been marinating on what this video would be ever since, or if I'd ever even make it.
I've only started working on this again very recently.
Truman's been dead for a long time. I don't think he cares what I have to say. His legacy's locked in, and my video won't change that. I'm just giving my take on his legacy, one that's completely undeserved and backwards, in my opinion. There's no one person responsible for how things are in the world today, but if I were to award a president most responsible, Truman gets a cookie.
I don't know if you watch the news, but people are still dying today for no reason, just as they did in Hiroshima. And in some cases, these sickos use what happened at Hiroshima to justify their own terror.
Can I say this? Why is it okay for America to drop 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end their existential threat war? Why was it okay for us to do that? I thought it was okay. To Israel, do whatever you have to do to survive as a Jewish state.
Senator, again, military officials say
whatever you have to do.
We nuked the Japanese twice in order to get unconditional surrender. That needs to be the same here. There is something deeply, deeply wrong with this culture, and it needs to be defeated.
It was a precedent set by America, my home, a place that could be the best country in the world.
But only if we quit doing things like this, and then lying to ourselves about the actions of our country. We traded the American dream for this American mythology built from the lies we tell ourselves.
It's to make us feel proud to be Americans. And I can't think of an American myth more foundational to the current world order than the false justifications of the nukes dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war was already over and Japan was basically ready to surrender, but not unconditionally surrender.
And those two words are what caused the bombings. Neither side had the pride to budge. Truman wanted Japan to surrender unconditionally because negotiated peace doesn't sound as hard, even if it resulted in the same thing. And Japan didn't want to surrender unconditionally because their emperor's fate would be up in the air. It was the only reservation they had about surrendering. In Japanese culture at the time, the emperor was a deity. He was their god, basically, to the vast majority of them. A similar execution for America would be an execution of Jesus Christ, or LeBron, or SpongeBob, or something. A simple conversation, not even a conversation, a letter or telegram or something. Letting Japan know that we were going to spare their emperor, which we actually did in real life. This dude ended up living to 80. It would have prevented all of this. It would have prevented the mass murder at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, certainly. The rest is speculative.
Who knows what would have happened? But everything that has happened has been a chain reaction of America dropping the bombs.
When I came to you with those calculations, we thought we might start a chain reaction that would destroy the entire world.
I remember it well. What happened?
We spent trillions and trillions of dollars throughout the years that could have went to solving the actual problems of the world. That money could have fed, clothed, housed every human being on this planet, which would have paid for itself many times over.
Not one human being excluded.
And instead, we wasted those precious world-changing trillions on war, on researching the nukes, developing the nukes, testing them, maintaining the nukes, discarding the old nukes, and replacing them with newer ones. Weapons we can't even comprehend the destruction of, which we've never used, hopefully never will, and most infuriating of all, we've never truly needed. Of course, the US needed to make them because the Soviets were, and the Soviets had to make them because the US was, but none of this needed to happen. The world did not need this. The discovery of nuclear power may have been inevitable, but the arms race certainly was not. Neither was America's foreign policy, which has not changed that much since Truman founded the CIA. There have been a couple times America took a step off his path, like when Jimmy Carter didn't blow up Iran for re-election or when Kennedy didn't go through with invading Cuba. But by and large, America continued to do things around the world that Truman would appreciate.
I believe we did.
I think that letter sparing the emperor would have prevented all of this, but I don't know, because it didn't happen. All I do know is what happened, and that it didn't need to. In these two videos, I'll be unpacking it all, telling the story of one of the most consequential men ever born, and what I make of him. 80 years ago today, Truman did the craziest, the dumbest, most unnecessary, and the most important thing that's ever happened in human history. In this first video, that's what I'll be focusing on. Second one, we'll talk about everything that happened afterwards. Harry Truman's story isn't as black and white as a fan or hater of him would make it out to be. It's nuanced, but not complicated. I'll give it my all to do this story justice. Here's the Truman video.
It's impossible through words to describe what is necessary to those who do not know what horror means.
You can do whatever you want in war as long as you win.
Horror.
That's just how it is. It was like that in the BC days, and even with our courts and councils of today, it's still the case pretty much, as long as your country has a nuke. It's not a good way to operate, but it's all we know how to do. We've been doing it since we began. We've never got along, and it doesn't look like we ever will. War will never die, regardless of how many people have. The 20th century challenged that idea, but to no avail. 2 decades after the war to end all wars, there is an even bigger war. Thanks to this man, who I'm not even going to dignify by saying his name or showing an unblurred photo of him. He wanted to take over the world and to only have one ethnicity around. He was really picky and impossible to coexist with. Around this time, nuclear fission was discovered in Germany, which meant a nuclear chain reaction was theoretically possible. Albert Einstein got word of this and wrote to President Roosevelt. He used typical science, nerdy language, giving context to the discovery, but then started speaking plain English in the third paragraph, warning him that extremely powerful bombs may be constructed, and that Germany may already be getting to work. Roosevelt initially set up some little committee, but after Japan did the dumbest thing anyone's ever done, he took it more seriously after we were entered into the war. He created the nuclear program called Project Manhattan shortly thereafter, but it had to stay top secret. The US military recruited dozens of the smartest scientists in America. Chief among them was J. Robert Oppenheimer. This is the reason we built the bombs. They were built for the Nazis in case they were making them. It's important we remember that. Luckily, the Nazis never came close to building them. They just didn't treat their scientists well. Some of the best scientists were Jewish, so they mostly fled, and even the ones that weren't Jewish were called Jewish in the press. In Nazi Germany, ideas were banned. Not just things like freedom and stuff, but even physics, or Jewish science as they called it. So they purged themselves of Einstein's influence, inventing Aryan physics, and were limited to it, which did not work out for them in the long run. The Nazis were uninterested and turned off by the Jewish nuclear bomb idea, but the Allies never knew that. Heisenberg, the top scientist in Germany, instead tried to use uranium for energy production, but even that hadn't got much funding. By the end of the war, Germany was nowhere close to where Project Manhattan was. In Black Ops Zombies terms, Nazi Germany's nuclear program was like the Olympia in the starting room, with low ammo, and America was like a pack-a-punch thunder gun. But again, the Allies never knew the state of the Nazis' nuclear program until after the war. If Einstein knew it would have crashed and burned this hard, he would have never sent that letter to FDR, which he called the one great mistake in my life. This isn't the FDR video, but before I get on with the rest of this, we gotta talk about him for a minute.
The only thing we have to fear is
I'll try to be brief.
fear itself.
If you don't know much about FDR, then this next minute is for you. He came from a rich New York family, but his entire thing was to help the poor. He figured it wasn't a good idea for a country to allow millions of people to constantly struggle for basic needs, with no hope for a better life. But he wasn't always like that. He used to be no different from the typical politician you'd see today, or really anywhere throughout history. Someone who holds a chief concern of getting re-elected, climbing the political ladder, pleasing their ego, and nothing really else. Sure, they have opinions on the issues and can be charming at a fundraising event, but if you looked into their eyes, you'd see nothing. But everything changed when he quit feeling his legs, in the summer of 21. He was diagnosed with polio. There was no cure. He just had to learn how to live with it. Life-changing, can't even begin to describe it. It was a long and brutal recovery, never completed. This is where he learned what suffering was, and started noticing it around him. Just down the road from the golf course he can't even play at anymore was an impoverished farmer working all day every day to give his family enough to eat, at times sacrificing his own plate, if not the portions of the food on it. This was a wake-up call for FDR. He'd never been so confronted with poverty. Franklin was diagnosed with polio decades before its cure. There was nothing that could be done about his suffering, but something could be done about the suffering poverty brought, Franklin thought. He returned to politics with this as the nucleus of his passion. When the Great Depression hit, he was already a successful governor of New York, the clear favorite to be the Democratic nominee for the next election. He ran on giving people government jobs and financial help to combat the Great Depression. Broke people loved it, and he won in a landslide.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
He was one of the few men in power who truly cared, and people took notice, rewarding him with landslide victory after landslide victory, along with the most impressive supermajorities in congressional history. In 1940, FDR didn't really want to run again. He already served 2 terms after all, which followed the unbroken precedent established by Washington. But the Democrats hadn't another serious option. This time, however, he wasn't going to put up with a conservative vice president who disagreed with him on everything important. His first VP disagreed with him so vehemently that he decided to run for the Democratic nomination in 1940. After Roosevelt defeated this futile attempt, he was going to pick any vice president that he wanted, and he went with his agricultural secretary, Henry Wallace, who was aligned with him on everything. Wallace was the true progressive champion of the party, even going further than Roosevelt on race, and not being particularly shy about it. Wallace realized how stupid racism was from an early age. Wallace's father was a professor who befriended one of his colleagues, inviting him home to dinner, quickly becoming a family friend. That man, once an orphaned kid born into slavery, was named George Washington Carver, whom you might remember learning about in school during Black History Month, as I did. It's a small world sometimes. He's commonly recognized as the man who invented peanut butter. While that's inaccurate, he found hundreds of different uses of peanuts through his experiments, bringing him great success and fame, but he admits it was not his greatest work. He was a brilliant scientist who pioneered innovations in botany and agriculture. He found his most fulfilling work from the Agricultural Experiment Station at the Tuskegee Institute, later Tuskegee University, where he published dozens of bulletins giving advice and recipes to poor struggling farmers on how to self-sustain and conquer soil depletion, among other challenges. All the while, he didn't patent any of his inventions, saying that it would take up too much time. I wouldn't get anything else done. But mainly, I don't want any discoveries to benefit specific favored persons. I think they should all be available to all people. He was dubbed the Black Leonardo by Time magazine. This guy was Henry's mentor. When visiting, he'd take young Henry on walks, picking out plants, teaching and quizzing him on what they were and where they fit in the farm's ecosystem. He didn't just share his botanical and agricultural wisdom, but also the treasures of life. Carver instilled in Henry that all life is precious. He had a sense that all living things were divine, that God could speak from parts of a flower, a blade of grass, a toddler laughing from a game of peekaboo, or a hummingbird singing good morning outside your window. All life is precious. Henry carried that with him for the rest of his life, and being so close to having a president understanding that and fumbling it is among the chief tragedies of the 20th century.
The people, in their millennial and revolutionary march toward manifesting here on earth the dignity that is in every human soul, hold as their credo the 4 freedoms enunciated by President Roosevelt. We who live in the United States may think there is nothing very revolutionary about freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and freedom from the fear of secret police. But when we begin to think about the significance of freedom from want for the average man, then we know that the revolution of the past 150 years has not been completed, either here in the United States or in any other nation in the world.
Henry was the clear pick for Roosevelt. He was the most loyal to the New Deal. When the party bosses resisted Wallace's nomination for the VP, Roosevelt wrote a prolific letter to the DNC, which is as relevant as it was then as it is today, which translates to, "I will not let my party trade the people's will for cronyism. I'd rather enjoy the rest of my life in retirement. Take it or leave it." His wife Eleanor went to the floor of the convention and reaffirmed the president's will. This upset the white supremacist Dixiecrats, but they had no choice. Roosevelt was the only Democrat that could win, which he did in another landslide. In 1944, FDR was essentially dying, but that didn't concern Americans. The election would be a mere formality. Whoever his running mate was for that election was going to be the next president. All eyes were on the 1944 Democratic Convention, as the political players of the day would decide who the next president was going to be. FDR took a passive role in the decision, as he was in failing health and spent all of his available energy on the war effort. He had hoped for his current VP to retain, but didn't want to fracture the party in any way. He pledged satisfaction with whoever would win the hearts and minds of the DNC. Senator Samuel D. Jackson, a player at the convention, later remarked that he wanted printed on his tombstone, "Here lies the man that stopped Henry Wallace from becoming President of the United States." The conservative white supremacist Dixiecrats for the party put their wind behind James Burns for the VP nominee, a senator from South Carolina who loved segregation and hated trade unions and anti-lynching bills. He was an incredibly powerful senator at the time, but he didn't really have a shot at the nomination. The party bosses rallied behind Harry Truman, the senator from Pendergast, as the dark horse compromise candidate. Harry earned that nickname from Tom Pendergast, the boss of a Missouri-based political machine responsible for his career. Harry got himself a gig as a local county judge without ever stepping foot into law school, all thanks to Tom Pendergast. After a few years, Harry wanted to run for Congress, but his boss turned it down. When it came time for the 1934 Senate race, Harry was the 5th man for the job, after 4 other guys declined Tom's request to run. When a reporter then asked Tom why he chose Harry, he said, "I wanted to demonstrate that a well-oiled machine could send an office boy to the Senate." And he did. 10 years later, here Harry was. At the convention, Wallace had the Union support, every black delegate, and the support of mostly all the crowd when he went to the floor giving a speech nominating Roosevelt, full of righteous indignation, constantly getting interrupted by applause. The speech ended and pandemonium manifested under that roof in Chicago. Witnessing it all, Florida Senator Pepper, a leading Wallace supporter, realized that if a vote was held that night, Wallace would sweep the convention. So he rushed to the podium from a distance to nominate Wallace. At the podium were a panicked DNC chair Bob Hannekin, Chicago Mayor Ed Kelly, and the session chair Senator Jackson, all deliberating on what to do. The scene was pure chaos. Senator Pepper fought his way through the crowd, hundreds of journalists, delegates, and spectators, all in his way. Hannekin by now was at the rear of the hall, throwing the doors open at lightning speed, letting the outer crowd in, while Mayor Kelly was at the microphone shouting about fire rules, saying that there were too many people in the room. Pepper was now to the steps of the podium. The chairman noticed him, ran to the microphone, immediately saying, "Motion made, the convention adjourned. All in favor of the motion, let me know by saying aye." A few said aye. The overwhelming majority of the crowd said nay, and Jackson responded, "That's it, the convention is adjourned." Senator Pepper was merely 5 feet away from the microphone. 5 feet in a few seconds. From the bombing of Hiroshima and all of its consequences from never happening. The voting was delayed, deals were made, and Harry Truman was nominated for vice president the next day. Gallup released a poll on July 20th, 1944, on the day of Wallace's convention speech, asking voters who they wanted as VP. 65% said they wanted Wallace as vice president. Burns had 3%, and 2% picked Harry Truman. In 1922, Harry S. Truman was pushing 40, living under the same roof as his mother-in-law. He was a nobody from a small Missouri town and never lived outside of it for his entire life, aside from when he served honorably overseas in World War I. Up to this point, he had a few failed businesses, was a failed farmer, and was almost bankrupted. He was a loser, not to throw stones in glass houses. Nearly a quarter century later, Harry was a dying Giants vice president. They didn't talk much. They only met in person 2 times. Harry was just kind of there waiting for the inevitable to happen. Once it did, Harry was sworn in as President of the United States on April 12, 1945.
So help me God.
During the end of the most deadly and destructive conflict in human history, World War II. "Boys, if you ever pray, pray for me now," he said to a gaggle of reporters on the first full day of his presidency. "I don't know if you fellas have ever had a load of hay fall on you, but when they told me what happened yesterday, I felt the moon, the stars, and all the planets had fallen on me." They responded with something along the lines of, "We support you, Mr. President," to which he replied, "I wish you hadn't called me that." A couple weeks later, Hitler was dead. I guess Truman was so threatening that when Hitler found out that Truman was going to be the next American president, he just killed himself and gave up. This Truman presidency's gone pretty damn well so far. The Nazis surrendered and war was over in Europe. Now Truman could put all of his attention into Japan, war in the Pacific, and he got right to
bombing. He flattened dozens of cities, over 100 total. An estimated 500,000 were killed in these fire bombings. 100,000 alone in Tokyo, with millions more made homeless. Military bases, ports, factories were not the only places bombed. Entire cities were, full of people. The rationale behind this was to psychologically devastate the population into giving up. The other was for strategic military purposes. But you could stretch any city into being strategic.
Every city had some kind of industry output, whether it made things directly for the military, bombs, guns, equipment, clothes, etc. And even normal factories making light bulbs or whatever contributed to the war effort, as it contributed to the Japanese economy. And the people that work at those factories are keeping the war alive. The hospitals the workers go to when they're sick, the schools the workers' kids go to, and the playgrounds are all connected to that society's contribution to the war effort. Everywhere was a target. As General LeMay put it, there are no innocent civilians. It is their government and you are fighting a people. You are not trying to fight an armed force anymore. So it doesn't bother me so much to be killing the so-called innocent bystanders. We were just dipping our toe in Dresden. We only killed 25,000 there. Although Dresden was truly significant for arms production, communication, and transportation, plus the Nazis showed no signs of surrendering, it took until the Red Army reached the bunker for them to quit.
But I don't know, 25,000 civilians seems a bit way too much. Not to play centrist, armchair, supreme commander of the Allied forces or anything. As for Japan, they did show signs they wanted an end, albeit months into the fire bombings. They reached out to their Russian ambassador as they were still, at peace because their non-aggression pact hadn't expired yet. And they were seeking better terms to end the war, mainly sparing their emperor.
On July 18th, the U.S. intercepted this message from Japan to Russia. Stalin even told him about it at the Potsdam Conference, where the Big Three met to chop up the post-war world. This came right after the Trinity test, where those scientists I talked about earlier completed Project Manhattan, successfully detonating the first atom bomb. Truman talked to Stalin, who reaffirmed his pledge he made to Roosevelt at the Yalta Conference to enter the war against Japan, and he was going to do it in the next few weeks. This right here destroys the myth of the American invasion of Japan. We made battle plans to invade Japan if it came to that, but it didn't look like we needed them. It was off the table. Truman was thrilled, writing to his wife that he got what he came for. He knew the Russians invading would finally get Japan to surrender, and he was right. The Russians invading was apocalyptic for Japan. They were at a severe military disadvantage to put up any kind of resistance, and most importantly, the Soviets would hold no reservations on killing their emperor in probably the most brutal and public way fashionable. After Hiroshima, the Japanese generals hardly reacted and continued fighting. Days went by. What was the big deal with another city being bombed? Added to the long list. It was just a bunch of innocent civilians after all. The generals were unaffected. But when word of Russia's declaration of war reached Tokyo, the Prime Minister met with the Emperor, and they both were in alignment on surrendering. An emergency meeting of the Supreme Council was called. The hardliners were adamant on continuing the war. The moderates wanted to surrender with the condition that the Emperor would be spared, and the council was deadlocked. Hours into the meeting, they got word of Nagasaki being bombed, which didn't change anything. The council was still deadlocked. More hours went by. The government cabinet joined them. More hours went by. They broke for dinner. Nearly after a day of deliberating, the Emperor finally intervened in an emotional scene, agreeing that they should surrender, with himself getting spared. It was over. There was nothing the hardliners could do. Their God spoke. Truman accepted their condition for the unconditional surrender. The Emperor announced the surrender publicly to the Japanese people, which was the first time they'd ever heard the voice of their God. But back at Potsdam, before all of this, Truman thought that with the success of Trinity, he could get Japan to surrender without Russia invading. On July 26, the Allies issued the Potsdam Declaration, demanding the unconditional surrender of Japan. In an earlier draft of the declaration, Secretary of War Stimson included in it that Japan would be able to keep their monarchy. But Truman nixed this term. Japan was not going to surrender without a guarantee that their emperor would be spared.
We could have easily told Japan that their emperor would be spared. We didn't even have to do it publicly if we were concerned about looking weak or whatever. We could have easily contacted them through a back channel through Moscow or something, telling them, hey, we're going to spare your emperor, but you need to officially surrender unconditionally. And it would have been no different from what happened in real life, with them surrendering but not technically unconditionally, and us calling it unconditional surrender anyways. A conversation, a letter, telegram or something. And the craziest thing of all, the emperor was actually spared,
making everything that happened unnecessary. Instead, Truman demanded unconditional surrender. But those in the Japanese war room should have, even not knowing what would have happened to their god king. The war was over. Their navy was destroyed. Their army. They had no infrastructure. Japan was bombed back to the Stone Age. The only attacks they could muster up were kamikazes. But still, Japan didn't surrender. Why would they? Leaders of brutal regimes like Imperial Japan couldn't find a fuck to give how many people die. Their own people aren't an exception. All they care about is maintaining power, and if they're in a war, winning the war. If people have to die to achieve that, then run it. Who cares? Even when defeat is inevitable and obvious, their pride blinds reality and morality. The Japanese Empire was among the most evil empires in history, going band for band with the Nazis when it came to cruelty. Some experts estimate their body count is up to 30 million. They used Chinese babies as bayonet practice. They committed some of the worst atrocities we've ever seen, like the rape of Nanking, Unit 731, doing things I can't get into in this video, but there are other videos on it if you want to ruin your day.
When people justify the nukes, this is their biggest argument. Oh, Japan was evil. Them nukes were nothing compared to what they did, and they had it coming. And I'd be careful. It's a dangerous road to go down. By that same logic, you're justifying Al-Qaeda taking out their anger from the actions of the U.S. government on innocent people in New York City who had nothing to do with it, which is something I reject completely, and something you should too, because it'll only lead to more innocent people dying for no reason. Going down that road, you'd be justifying invading Iraq, killing 250,000 people. You'd be justifying another 9/11 without even trying to. You'd be justifying October 7th. You'd be justifying the genocide we're all helplessly watching right now in Gaza, which honestly would make it pretty easy for you to become a U.S. senator. Whatever you call yourself politically, if you hold this logic any merit at all you're doing is enabling future genocide, atrocities, suffering, innocent people, women, children, babies, dying for no reason. And it makes you a monster. No different from Benjamin Netanyahu, Osama bin Laden, or Harry Truman. This isn't just a senior quote, but words that we need to live by. An eye for an eye leaves the world blind, which it clearly is, due to this tit-for-tat primal instinct of getting even living inside all of us, manifesting itself across the world in genocide, dumbass wars, and slaughter, with no end in sight. If there's any hope for the world, then we need to evolve past this. It's been plaguing us since we began. We need to drop this bad habit right here and now, or else more innocent people will die for no reason. Maybe your mother, your boyfriend, your barber, or your daughter will be next. I hope not. It's up to us.
But none of that mattered to Harry. His mind was made up. Figured it'd be best to not corrupt it with doubt. Truman was the guy, and here we were. At Potsdam, he wrote in his journal that he believes they'll fold when Manhattan appears above their homeland. When, not if. He never contemplated. He made the decision to drop the bomb when he got news that he had it, ignoring their peace terms a little while longer and accepting them after he got to drop it twice. One above a hospital in a city killing over 100,000, and one above a Catholic church in another city killing 200 soldiers out of the 70,000 total dead. The lucky ones died instantly. The rest melted alive or suffered for months, just so he could show the world who he was. The tough guy that could do the ultimate unthinkable evil while pretending to be the good guy, unleashing hell upon thousands of God's children, burning them alive, walking with fire, with not a goddamn thing anyone could do about it, spending the rest of his life lying to himself, with the world believing it. That's how he could sleep. That's who Harry Truman was.